I just want to say before I start that I'm here from Quebec, and we spend a lot of time having referendums in Quebec, and I've always said to my husband, boy, when they have that referendum, they're going to separate, I'm packing that truck and I'm heading to Ottawa. But I have to say I haven't been feeling too much love in the last 3 days. Anyhow, I hope I'll leave here feeling lots of love. My name is Valerie Price, and I run Act for Canada. The basic position of our organization is that we are dedicated to critical inquiry and truth-seeking, not to advocacy or agitation. We are interested in hearing about a variety of ways to deal with the problem of Islamic radicalism and extremism within our countries and neighborhoods, and would therefore like to scrutinize why Gavin Bobby seems to command a zoning-based mosque blocking campaign to the public. We have not taken a position on this approach as yet. Here in Canada, the former chair in Islamic Studies at the University of Alberta described how the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood worked to enforce the role of the mosque as a center of Islamic revolution. Yosef Qaradawi, unconditionally endorsed by leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood operating in Canada, describes the role of the mosque in these words: to guide public policy of a nation, raise awareness of critical issues, and to reveal its enemies. From ancient times, the mosque has had a role in urging jihad for the sake of Allah. Many leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood have praised and invited Muslim youth to read and adopt the teachings of Yosef Qaradawi, the main scholar of the Muslim Brotherhood operating in Canada, and one must be reminded that most of the Islamic organizations in Canada refer to Yosef Qaradawi for his scholarly advice on Islamic issues. Qaradawi promotes the conquest of the West by Muslims. He claims that Hitler was sent by Allah to punish the Jews. He endorses the killing of those who leave Islam, etc., etc. I met Gavin Bobby at the Brussels conference last year, and I liked what he had to say in his impassioned speech. In light of what is going on in my own country, Act for Canada decided that he would be a good speaker in helping us to address many of the same problems that we are now confronting in Canada. Gavin Bobby started the Law and Freedom Foundation in 2011 in order to preserve the traditions of law, freedom, and public order as exemplified by British common law. They do not oppose Muslims. They oppose discrimination against women, violent treatment of homosexuals, intimidation of communities, and persecution of Jews. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to present to you Gavin Bobby.
Thank you. Now, with your permission, if you don't mind, I would enjoy beginning by sharing with you some of my most treasured possessions. This secretive cabal of white-collar bigots, that was Vice magazine. Foreign Policy magazine, clean-shaven, brown hair cropped close, and his small eyes squint behind wire-frame glasses. I don't know what that's about. And then the Sunday Times. He also provides a free legal service for those who oppose mosque developments. Now, I think that is intended to be an insult. Thin stuff, but you take comfort where you can, and that will go into the scrapbook as well. But I think my favourite one was a journalist who said to me, wasn't I trying to see myself as the quixotic heir to Winston Churchill and the Duke of Wellington? The only trouble is he failed to explain what those other two gentlemen were famous for. So you'll have to guess on that one. Now, what I'd like to do is to talk to you about what our experience is in England, what we have experienced, what has happened in England, and what we have learned from it. I don't have a great deal of experience of Canada. This is the first time I have visited. I don't know a lot about how your planning system works, and I don't know a very great deal about individual mosques in Canada, although Islamic doctrine still applies. What I want to talk about is, well, the following things. First of all, what is a mosque? Secondly, what goes on in a mosque? What is the empirical evidence? What do we know about that? What can we say? Thirdly, what happens in England when a mosque goes ahead in an area? What is the experience? What do people experience in their homes, in their neighbourhoods? Fourthly, will this be resolved? Fifth, why this problem needs to be addressed soon? And when is it going to come to a head? How long have we got? Then what you can do, what I think Canada can do about it, and I think you might be surprised about that, I think there is good news there. I think there is good news in general. As you know, our organisation is Law and Freedom, and our motto is we win. We do win. That will continue. We have won 16 of the 17 cases that we have fought, and that is not because we do not have right on our side. That is not because we are unskilled. That is not mere luck. The ones that we don't get involved with tend to go the other way. And I will explain how we win, and you may want to draw lessons from that, but that is our English experience. Now, first of all, what is a mosque? The word mosque comes from the Arabic word masjid, which is itself derivative of the word sajada, which means to prostrate, to submit. So a mosque is about submission. Someone submitting to someone else, somebody prostrating to someone or something else. It is about power. It involves, in its essence, in its nature, concepts of dominance. That is completely unlike the root of a church. Now, the word church comes from the Greek root, the Greek word kyriake. Kyriake meaning the Lord's house. The word temple comes from the word templum. Now, templum means a place that is fit for the taking of auspices, consecrated ground. These are words, these are concepts that have at the bottom of them the idea of contemplation of the divine. That is different from the idea of prostration, the idea of power. And this is reflected in the history. Now, the first mosque, you may be aware, you may not, I don't know. In 622, Muhammad set up the original mosque in Medina. He'd been in Mecca for 13 years, hadn't been able to get up his dictatorship, retreats to Medina, and then gets up his dictatorship there and establishes the first mosque. And that first mosque was more about political control, more about military activity than it was about contemplation of the divine. It was used as a political office. Jihad operations were planned and directed there. Commanders were appointed. Armies were blessed and dispatched. Treaties were drawn up. Sharia law was declared. The superiority of Muslims over non-Muslims was declared. And death sentences were pronounced. Now, just take a moment to think about that. Suppose you go into a church and then after the hymns and before the blessing, the vicar gets up and says, well, I know I'd like to declare a few death sentences. There's Mrs. Sidebottom, she told a funny joke about me last week, and I think she should be strung up for that. And there's Mr. Philpott, he was a rival for this benefice, he wanted my job as well. Perhaps he should be killed as well. Go and kill him. That is, people who mocked Muhammad were killed. Now, that is nothing like a church, and you cannot see any similarity in the root of the institution. Islamic doctrine requires Muslims to follow the example of Muhammad. He is the perfect example for all people, for all time. And that is why this is relevant. That is why this is worrying. And it continued. You will probably all have heard of Mecca. Now, 8 years later, in 630, Muhammad conquers Mecca. He gets an army, goes to Mecca, conquers Mecca. Now, I don't know if you know, if you've seen the black cube in Mecca, the Kaaba, that, prior to Muhammad taking it over, was the perfect multicultural cliche. It was used by Christians, Jews, Hindus and polytheists, all simultaneously. Up to 360 deities were revered there. That was enough to launch 1,000 local government equalities jobs. It was, you probably couldn't get so multicultural an institution today, and you certainly didn't after 630. When Muhammad had conquered it, He stood outside in full military gear and full military helmet and declared, "All the Muslims are brothers of one another and constitute one hand as against the non-Muslims." One hand as against the non-Muslims. And since then, the Kaaba has been only for Muslims. And Muhammad then set about conquering the Arabian Peninsula through war and massacre, including the massacre of 1,000 Jewish families at Banu Qurayza, where the men were killed and the women taken into slavery and the children taken into slavery. Now think about that, nearly 1,000 Jewish families killed and enslaved. Now, in the light of that, ask yourself what goes on in a mosque today. Is it any different? If so, how? I want to refer to three things. First of all, I refer to 2 empirical studies, and thirdly, I will refer to a British documentary. Now, those 2 studies, the first one was conducted by a man called David Yerushalmi in America. Very impressive, very good writer, very smart man. And that was called Sharia and Violence in American Mosques. What he did, that was 2011, what he did was to take a representative sample of 100 randomly chosen mosques from 14 states plus the District of Columbia, and examined the material and the preaching that was made available in them. And these were divided into 3 categories. The first was non-violent mosques, that is, mosques that didn't contain any violent material, mosques that didn't have DVDs showing people flying aeroplanes into buildings, mosques that didn't have sermons saying fund Hamas, fund other terrorists like Hezbollah. Now that is a non-violent mosque. Okay? Now when you go to church and you don't see a video saying go and kill the Baptists, go and fly an aeroplane into the Quaker meeting house, that is a non-violent church. It's absurd to talk about that. You just say, well, that's a church. You don't get calls to go and kill people in a church. You don't get calls to violence or funding terror in a church. Well, that is that category of non-violent mosque.